Welcome back to 8 Metal Strings. I think it's about time we do a proper breakdown and tutorial of how to do selective picking. Selective picking is essentially a composite technique that is made up of several other smaller techniques that we can work on individually in order to practice it. The first and arguably most important part of selective picking is to be able to do hammer-ons from nowhere. This is essentially doing a hammer-on without preparing it by plucking any note with a pick. Once we have the hammer-ons down, we can combine that with right-hand muting of the strings, picking notes, and plucking notes to create the illusion that we are playing many more notes with our right hand than we actually are. And that is because we're having some of those notes be played by our left hand doing the hammer-ons and some of them being played by the right hand plucking. In today's video, we're only going to be focusing on the hammer-on from nowhere because it is essential for getting this technique down and making it sound good. I've written a couple of exercises that we can use to practice this technique, and I've made it into a PDF that you can download for free in the description down below, so make sure you grab that before we get going so you can follow along. Alright, let's get into the tips and break down the hammer-on from nowhere so that we can learn how to selective pick. Alright, so for my tone today, I'm using Archetype Abasi by Neural DSP, and I'll put all my settings on screen right now so you can pause it if you want to check those out and have a starting point for making your own tone. But in general, a good starting place for creating a tone for selective picking is to have it relatively clean, maybe a little bit of gain in there, and some compression. So to start, as always, we're going to make sure that we are totally relaxed, and that includes our shoulders being down, our neck being relatively straight and facing forward. We're going to try to not kind of arch our back in any weird way by pushing it out and leaning down, or maybe even arching the other way and compromising the lower back. And we want to do this so that we have a nice neutral position that makes sure there's no extra tension while we're playing. As you probably know, as we start to increase the speed of techniques that we practice, any bit of tension that we're practicing at slow tempos gets amplified when we're doing it at faster tempos. And that tension can lead to injury, and it can also just slow us down, so you're not going to see the progress that you want to see. So with our relaxed and neutral body, we're going to start just by taking our right hand and muting with the side of the palm across the strings right close to the bridge. This isn't necessary for this technique, but we're going to get into why we're doing this a little bit later. So with our mute on, we're just going to take any one of your fingers and try playing a note with the left hand. Now we're not going to pick. I am holding a pick still, but we're not going to pick the note. We're just going to hammer the note on in order to make it sound. So the hardest part of this technique is to get enough velocity with the finger in order to get that note to sound cleanly. And we don't want to do this by raising the finger higher in order to get more power. We just want to do it by keeping it pretty close to the string and then moving it quickly. Think of it almost as the 1-inch punch. We don't need a big wind up in order to create force. We just need a high transfer of speed from resting position to the hammer-on. If you were to try to gain power by lifting the finger higher before the hammer-on, you're going to be losing accuracy because there's further for you to go before you hit the neck and more chance for the finger to kind of stray from its path and hit the wrong note or hit the wrong string or miss the string entirely. So keep it nice and close and really focus on a quick squeeze with the hand. Also try to aim for the tip of the finger here, as the fleshy part of the finger is not going to have as much force when we impact. So let's check out the first exercise to work on this technique. So it looks like this. And essentially what we're doing is we're taking a pair of fingers and walking across the strings vertically, alternating which finger is doing the hammer-on. So in this example, I'm using my first finger and my third finger as the finger pair I've chosen. The first finger is going to start on string 8, and in this case I'm in position 5, so I'm doing fret 5, and fret 7 with my third finger. And that finger is going to strike on the 7th string, so it's like doing a power chord shape. Next we're going to do the same thing on string 6 and string 5, and then 4 and 3, and 2 and 1. So at this point you can invert your fingers and come back down with the same fingering, which is going to be 1 and then 3. Or you can just mirror the way that you came up the strings and go back down doing 3 then 1. Both are valuable and worth trying. So beyond working on the accuracy and getting a nice quick short hammer-on from the fingers, another thing to focus on in this exercise is to make sure that you're pivoting on each finger and not just doing a little staccato bouncing notes. We don't want those fingers to kind of fly off right after the hammer-on. We want to hold the hammer-on until the next hammer-on goes on, and then we can release that first one and pivot to the next one. This will create a more legato sound and kind of remove those gaps in between your notes. It also sounds cleaner. One other very important thing to work on while you're doing this exercise is to make sure that every note, no matter what finger you're using, is around the same volume. We don't want one finger overdeveloped and the other one's really weak, barely ever to hit the note, but try to create a kind of consistent sound between all the fingers. Rather than... So we're doing finger 1 and 3 to demonstrate the example, but work on every different finger pair as you'll discover different weaknesses amongst them. You can also try this exercise in different positions. As the string height is going to be slightly different depending where you are in the neck, and you want to be able to do it no matter where you are. So the last exercise for today, to work on our hammer-on from nowhere, is a little bit more musical, and we're going to be taking the diatonic triads of any scale and working them up and down the neck. So I've written 3 examples on the PDF to get you started. The first is in G harmonic minor, the second in E melodic minor, and the third in C major. Each of these is also going to be based on a different inversion of the triad. So let's check one of them out. As is, it would sound something like this. But that's not necessarily how I want you to practice this one. Each of these triads, so every triplet or 3 notes, is going to be kind of its own little cell, and we can repeat each cell as many times as we want. So the first one, our 3-5-3, is our root G minor triad, and we can repeat it as many times as we like. Maybe trying different fingerings. See which one works best for you. And just focus on, again, getting those like quick, high velocity hammer-ons and clear notes. Once you feel pretty good with that, we can move on to the next one. And then we can work on that transition from 1 to 2. And then again, we can just repeat going up the same way through all of the different shapes. And working on all the different transitions between them. So this one is going to sound a little bit more musical. It's going to be using shapes that we're actually going to be using and encountering in music, and it's going to force you to work on some horizontal motion as well to connect these tapping ideas. There are tons of variations you can do with this exercise, and I encourage you to try them. One would be to change up the scale you're using. Another would be to use closed triads instead of open triads. Another one would be to use different string groups. So rather than 6, 5, and 3, well, you could do 7, 6, and 4, for example. And if you're really advanced and want to start mixing things up, you can start trying different diatonic cycles, kind of like Mick Goodrick shows in his Voice Leading Almanac book. We're not going to get into that today, but if you know it, you can start to experiment with that stuff. One last variation you can try is to invert the triads or to make new little patterns out of them. So right now, all of my triads are ascending, but you can always descend, or ascend and descend. You can also offset them. To create kind of new rhythmic variations. So key things to remember and work on with this exercise. Again, just work on keeping the fingers close to the neck and having a high velocity hammer-on, not a high distance hammer-on. Try to keep in mind as well, letting your arm fall where it wants to. We don't want to introduce any tension with any sort of weird shapes, even though, for example, this first shape, my arm is a little bit higher, and I have to put a little bit of effort to raise it. I'm not going to be tight when I do that. I just want to raise it with as little effort as possible. Again, not to introduce tension, so that when we start to speed these things up, we can actually speed them up and not be tight. If you're not super far down the theory rabbit hole and you're not really sure where to go beyond these 3 triadic exercises, then we can also think in shapes. So rather than worrying about am I playing all the notes in the right key, you can just think of shapes. Like we did the power chord shape earlier in our first exercise. So you could incorporate that into some horizontal motion. Or you could just create other random shapes with your fingers and try that. So for example, just making one up on the spot here, you could do 2, 4, 1, 3 across the strings. And just work that way. The goal here is not just to learn the exercises that I've written, but to work on the hammer-ons from nowhere in every possible finger pattern you can think of, so that whenever we're learning something or writing something in the future, you have all of them accessible. So that's about it for today's video. Next time, we're going to add the pick back into selective picking and learn how to coordinate the left hand and the right hand when they're doing completely different things. Remember, if you like what I'm doing on this channel and you want to support me and show me that you want to see more content like this, you can always buy me a coffee down at the link in the description. There you'll also find all my PDFs from my previous videos, and you can also sign up for lessons if that's something you're interested in doing. So with all that said, I hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and as always, happy practicing.